Hello, and welcome to Behind the Music, where we take an inside look at the music you'll hear on North Carolina Symphony programs. I'm Michelle Di Russo, Assistant Conductor of the North Carolina Symphony. This Friday, the Symphony will perform Beethoven's Triple Concerto as well as two movements from Berlioz' Symphonie Fantastique. This programmatic symphony is an important contribution to the early Romantic period, as until that point, we hadn't heard anything like it before. The originality of Berlioz' achievement in the Symphonie Fantastique is simply astonishing and a remarkable first symphony. Certainly, programmatic symphonies had been written before, for example, Beethoven's famous Pastoral Symphony, but in Symphonie Fantastique, Berlioz depicts images so specifically that they almost feel cinematic. His sense of programmatic music goes beyond the merely descriptive to enter a realm of psychology and the image of a state of mind, one that is far from stable and even spills into hallucinations. Berlioz was inspired by the writer François-René Chateaubriand, whose works he read during his youth and described an artist in a similar state to the one of the hero in Symphonie Fantastique. And he was also inspired by the actress Harriet Smithson. Berlioz was obsessed and consumed by his love for her since he saw her perform in Hamlet and Romeo and Juliet, but unfortunately his love was not reciprocated. The symphony is an extraordinary example of self-exploration and self-expression, a work of autobiography underscored by the subtitle Episode in the Life of an Artist. Since this instrumental drama lacks the assistance of words, an explanation is necessary. That is why the episode in question was carefully described in program notes that Berlioz wrote himself. The symphony has 5 movements, each of which depicts an episode in the protagonist's life. The first movement shows a troubled young musician suffering for love with a vision of this human model pursuing him unceasingly. This image is often accompanied by an idée fixe, a musical theme that surfaces throughout the piece with transformations to convey how his love changes or how his feelings change towards her. The theme appears in all movements, creating unity in the piece, and also represents his obsession with this love that he can't get out of his head. Berlioz first presents the idée fixe with a flute and violins at the beginning of the opening movement. Let's listen to it. The artist then finds himself in the tumult of a festive party in a peaceful contemplation of the sights of nature. The movement begins in a mysterious way that creates excitement until the waltz and main theme appears that is constantly interrupted by visions of his beloved. The same happens when he is in the alpine countryside. We can hear 2 shepherds conversing depicted in the English horn in a pastoral setting with a gentle rustling of the trees, believing his heart has found peace. When fear disturbs him, the idée fixe returns, and distant thunder ends the movement, reflecting his inner chaos. Under the influence of a narcotic drug, he imagines himself being led to the scaffold, where he is executed for murdering his beloved. Before the musical depiction of this execution, there is a brief, nostalgic recollection of the idée fixe in a solo clarinet, as though representing the last conscious thought of the soon-to-be executed man. Listen closely for the pizzicato notes that follow immediately after the clarinet solo depicting the execution. Finally, he sees himself at a witches' sabbath convened in honor of his death, at which the idée fixe now appears as a grotesque devilish dance heard along with a parody of the funeral chant, Dies Irae. This chant has deeply inspired other classical composers, and it has also been used in films and TV shows, the last one being the Netflix K-drama hit Squid Game. To close our concert, you're in for a treat, as you will have the pleasure of watching our own musicians perform Beethoven's Triple Concerto. Bonnie Thron, who is our principal cello, and Jacqueline Said-Wilborski, our principal second violin, will be performing along with guest pianist Solomon Eichner. By the turn of the 19th century, Beethoven had firmly established himself as one of Vienna's most prominent musicians. In 1800, Beethoven, not yet 30, started to realize that his hearing was deteriorating. The irony was not lost on Beethoven that soon he would be a composer and pianist unable to perform his own compositions. That is when, in 1902, he wrote a letter to his brothers, now known as the Heiligenstadt Testament, where Beethoven admitted his deafness and struggles, and shared with them how music and composition had saved his life. After this retreat and challenging moment in his life, Beethoven responded to adversity by composing several masterpieces in the first decade of the 19th century, which included his symphonies number 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, the Razumovsky string quartets, the Waldstein and Appassionata piano sonatas, and his only opera, Fidelio. The Triple Concerto, written in 1904, belongs to this fruitful period and features a trio of soloists and orchestra. While it was composed around the same time as his Symphony No. 3, Eroica, the concerto presents a far more lyrical side of Beethoven's craft. The chamber music combination of piano, violin, and cello was not new for these times. They had been in circulation since the 18th century with compositions by Mozart and Haydn, while Beethoven was in his formative years. This particular configuration was very appealing to Beethoven, mainly due to the new and fascinating instruments which would take over the harpsichord, the piano. Beethoven and the piano were inseparable. The composer, a virtuoso pianist, was always writing for his favorite instrument, whether in solo, chamber, or concerto settings. So why did Beethoven decide to venture into writing a concerto where the trio is collectively the soloist, a feat never done before? It is said that he wrote the concerto to provide his 16-year-old student, the Archduke Rudolf of Austria, an opportunity to perform as a soloist. Let's make it clear that Rudolf was also Beethoven's patron and that his livelihood depended on this relationship thriving. The first and apparently only performance of the Triple Concerto during Beethoven's lifetime occurred in 1807, and it is not certain who was the performer at the piano. Although this work is nowadays considered a masterpiece, the premiere was met with little success. Let's be honest, Beethoven did not set himself an easy task. Composing for this particular combination of instruments is challenging, especially when trying to balance the three different timbres of the solo instruments with the orchestral body, and when trying to create musical materials that are manageable and flexible, but that involves everyone in the trio. Beethoven was aware that the cello sound could get lost with the piano and violin, and so he wrote for its top register and had it introduce most of the thematic material to help the instrument pop in the trio configuration. He also allowed some breathing room where the trio played alone with minimal accompaniment from the orchestra to create room for thinner textures to come through. Soloists and ensembles are held in careful balance, not by blend, but by clear distinction. The Triple Concerto is divided into three movements where we will hear how Beethoven transitions smoothly and by contrast between the trio and the orchestra. The opening allegro is the most expansive of the work's three movements and includes decorative solo passage work, repetitions, variations, and extensions of themes that almost have a rococo character to them. I encourage you to listen for one of the common features of this movement, a dotted rhythm figure that gives graciousness and dignity, but not necessarily a heroic character to it. As mentioned before, the cello is given an important role in the work, and in this movement, as well as in the other two, it is in charge of introducing the first theme. Unusual for a concerto of this scale, the movement begins in a hushed manner in the lower strings, basses, and cellos, with a gradual instrumental crescendo and build-up of energy towards the main theme that is introduced by the trio. But don't worry, this movement doesn't disappoint and ends in a grandiose Beethoven manner. The second and slow movement is a large-scale introduction to the finale, which follows without a pause. The cello and violin share the same melodic material in this movement, while the piano provides a discrete accompaniment. The third movement begins after a brief semicadenza led by the cello, with dramatic repeated notes that transition smoothly into it. The third movement is then launched with a sparkling polonaise, an emblem of aristocrat fashion during the Napoleonic era and with Polish origin. A successful performance of this concerto honors the terminology of the word concertare, which means to arrange, agree, get together, and our musicians will definitely have to work together to bring bravura, grandeur, and expressiveness to this piece. I have no doubt you will be blown away by our musicians. Thank you for joining me in this deep dive into the works of Beethoven and Berlioz that you'll hear at this weekend's performance. We hope to see you in the concert hall.